I want to welcome everyone, including those that may be watching on a recorded version on YouTube, to Beginners Academy. We have a Zoom meeting on Mondays every week, and we like to help beginners and returning hams where we can with and have a talk every other week. And tonight's talk will be about propagation indexes. And my name is Greg Lane. I'm talking to you from Dothan, Alabama. And we'll let Frank in here. All right. Well, if you've been listening to the news, and it's hard not to on your computer, a recent headline back about May 10th, 11th, and so forth was the Northern Lights set the sky aglow amid a powerful geomagnetic storm. And when there is a powerful geomagnetic storm, you get the northern lights in the upper latitudes. But this storm was so strong, it covered a larger part of the country and so a lot of people became aware of it. But what they probably didn't know is that it's really neat to look at, but it doesn't help the ham radio operator that much. So when the geomagnetic storms are about, our propagation using the ionosphere is more difficult, or could be impossible. So, and just for a little context, some of these effects are frequency dependent. So I put up the amateur radio bands, which span from 135 kilohertz up into the gigahertz. But the propagation that we're going to talk about tonight, that is hams working other hams at some distance, applies to pretty much from 14 megahertz, which is 20 meters, possibly all the way up to 6 meters, but definitely to 10 meters, which is 28 megahertz. So if you have a general ticket, you have privileges on all these bands. And I have a little diagram here. The reason that hams can get beyond line of sight, one reason is the ionosphere is very helpful to us. And when our signals travel from Earth and hit layers in the ionosphere, they can be refracted and return to Earth. Well, that's where the frequency makes a difference. And I'm going to talk about maximum usable frequency, or MUF, in a moment. But basically, as this chart has increasing frequency, depending on the ionization of the layers, and I've got two layers on this diagram, your signal may not be returned to Earth. So that's not too good for propagation around the globe. But if your signal's below the maximum usable frequency, it will be returned to Earth. And actually, this process of bouncing, it can bounce off the Earth, but for multiple hops. So it's something that we get for free. I like to say God provided this, and it's something there's no charge for, unlike some other kinds of communication. So maximum usable frequency is the highest radio frequency that can be used for transmission between 2 points on Earth by reflection from the ionosphere. And one notable thing, well, this kind of propagation is called skywave propagation, or skip. And if I go back to the diagram, the way these signals bounce off the ionosphere, they may bounce over stations that are close by, maybe in your state or the state next door. You know, you may not be able to work them on this skywave propagation. And that region where you can't work them is called let's see, it's called the skip zone. All right. And I believe I got this from Copilot, so I have to give them credit. But interestingly, this index remains, or the maximum usable frequency isn't related to your transmit power. And so I'll move on. One of my favorite people on Hams on YouTube, he has something he calls electronic notes that shows up on YouTube all the time. Well, anyway, he is very good at boiling things down, and he says one of the key skills for any HFDXer is to know how to judge what band conditions may be like. Conditions may be excellent one day with many stations audible from all over the world, but a few days later, it may be that only a few stations are audible. So on this kind of propagation, it's not really guaranteed. And these indexes, we're going to talk about 3 tonight, are helpful. The first one, solar flux. We'll cover these in more detail. Solar flux, and then the A index and the K index. The P, I believe, means planetary. So they can measure these indexes at various places on the globe, and they usually bring them together with a K sub P. Okay. And a good working knowledge of what these numbers represent and what they mean is an advantage even for the ham with the most well-equipped station. So first up is solar flux index, SFI, and the SFI measures the sun's radio emissions at a wavelength of 10.7 centimeters, or 2,800 megahertz. Well, I'll say that the SFI is kind of a proxy for the sunspot number. So it's another way to measure the influence of the sun on Earth, and but it's highly related, positively correlated with the sunspot number, which we won't go into detail here. It can range from 60 to 400, and the higher, generally, the better. They give you improved long-distance HF communications. And for daytime propagation on all HF bands, especially the higher frequency bands, 20 meters and up, a high SFI is favorable. And Mr. Poole says that, like currently, high levels of solar flux are good news. Generally, the higher the flux, the better the conditions will be for higher HF frequencies, and even 6 meters, which is like 50 to 54 megahertz. However, the levels need to be maintained for some days. In this way, the overall level of ionization in the F2 layer will build up. And typically values of 150 and more will ensure good HF band conditions, although levels of 200 or more will ensure they are at their peak. Well, we have previously talked about the 11-year solar cycle, and there's solar maximum and solar minimum. And in between, I believe I have a slide that will cover that, which is the next one. And so here we are in 2024. We are kind of in the middle of solar cycle 25. I don't know if we peaked. We're probably close to it. But this solar cycle, the solar flux and the sunspot numbers have exceeded expectations, or at least the consensus of the experts.
I'd like to interject quickly here.
Please do, Chris.
There is one expert, and his name is Dr. Scott McIntosh, and it's pretty well bang on with what he predicted.
Yes.
It doesn't agree with NASA and NOAA, and he's rubbing their face in it quite a bit.
Yeah. So one of my sayings is a solar maximum is it would be bad to waste it. So you want to keep up with this and take advantage of it. And now is that time, because as we go to roll over to 2030, we'll be headed for a minimum. And ham radio is still good at the minimum, but it's the upper bands aren't as good. All right. So we covered SFI. Next, the A index, which is daily average of magnetic activity. And so the Earth's ionosphere, I can't really give you a physics lesson, but when there's a CME or the charged particles from the sun will influence the Earth's ionosphere, and that's what we're talking about. So actually, those charged particles moving creates magnetic activity that disturbs our nice and quiet ionosphere. So the scale for the A index, 0 to 7 quiet, 8 to 15 unsettled, and you can see it there. 30 to 49 a minor storm, and if it's a severe storm, we've got 100 to 400. So this is a little chart I found of the daily A index for the last 30 days. So actually, I'm not sure if I see the day scale on here, but the big spike here was May 11th. And that's the day most of us hams will remember for a long time, particularly if we tried to get on that day. So that was the time that the Northern Lights or the Aurora was the talk of the internet. But for us hams, we had a tough time making contacts that day. So it taught us uh, that this stuff really does matter. And so, but as you can see, it has settled down, and most of the time it's quiet, but occasionally it will creep up and be more of an influence on our communications. All right. Well, this really is my favorite index. It's called the K index, and it's updated every 3 hours. And the scale goes from 0 to 9, with 0 being inactive. So if you see the K as being 1, 2, or they do it in a fraction, that's very sweet. As it gets to 3 and 4, um, it has more of an effect, but it's not quite a storm yet. But typically, for values 1, 2, 3, and 4, we get on and make successful contacts. It gets harder when it goes 5 and to 9. So, well, I asked Copilot, when was the K index? When was the last K index of 9? It said May 17th, which probably was an after effect, or these disturbances were just rolling in. And I'm sure on May, in fact, I just couldn't find a chart of it, on May 11th or 12th there, that the K index was 9. So, well, one thing I'll mention, no matter what the K index is, it is worth trying, but it may help explain if you have difficulty making contacts. Well, where could you find out what the values of these indexes? Well, I'll have to say all over the internet. And so I'm not recommending any one particular place. What you see on the right is embedded in a whole lot of websites. Some version of that is. And so I got a URL there, which is one place you can find this. So that little column there gives the summary, and we see SFI is 200. The sunspot number 124, A10, and K1. So after going through all these scales, I would say that that's very favorable. And if it holds up, that's really going to make, there's a big HF contest this weekend. So I believe it's CWWPX. So you can look that up. But the CW portions of the band, HF bands, will be full, and thousands, if not millions, of contacts will be made. All right. Well, this little display here goes on to give you kind of a summary for the bands. And so that's helpful, because really the conditions and where we are in the 11-year sunspot cycle can make a difference on the band that you're going to choose. So at this part of the sunspot cycle, as you can see, during the day, 10 meters is good. Well, in a few years, it will probably say 10 meters is poor, or if not close. So I won't belabor all this. If you do a search for current HF conditions, you're going to get a lot of helpful hits that present this information in different ways. All right, this is a little different here. There's a tool called VOA cap, or maybe vocap, VOA cap, and it's a very powerful tool. And there's an online version for ham radio, and you can pick any two spots on the earth, and you can see which bands are favorable to communicate. And I picked something close to where I am in Alabama, and something in South Africa. We have a friend down there, so set this up and hit enter, and then the next screen. There's all kinds of screens to get from this, but here's one output, and I didn't capture exactly what the colors mean, but the darker, or the oranges or reds, are actually better propagation, I believe. So this can be used to pick a band and a time to try to communicate. You may have wanted to pick between Alabama and Japan or Hawaii or Europe or whatever, and you would get different charts. And so I've actually used this to try to talk to Eddie. I have talked to him, QRP, but well, anyway, this is just a little bonus, and this essentially, this software program takes in account the sunspot and SFI predictions. It takes that in account, which drives the maximum usable frequency, which in turn drives what may be the best band to use. Well, anyway, we have covered a subject that this is just the tip of the iceberg for all this stuff. So if you're really interested in DX or contesting, this can be very helpful. And even maybe you want to work parks on the air, and maybe you're trying to get all the states or some parks in Puerto Rico or outside the United States. This will help you. And I don't want to get through this without mentioning Space Weather Woman on YouTube. That's where I see she has a space weather report, and she is a space weather physicist. And so the solar influences are somewhat, it is weather, similar to your terrestrial weather report, but she has done an awesome job of breaking it down for us to understand. And so she does about a 15 or 20-minute report, and she also has other shows. And on her show, she'll say, and she is a ham, by the way, she'll say, for your Aurora watchers, things are very good. And she'll say, for you ham radio operators, it's not so good. So, so there you go. All right. to summarize, higher values of SFI basically mean that the ionosphere is going to be better charged, and the possibility of using the higher bands like 15 and 10 meters and 12 meters and so forth are a lot better with high SFI. On the A index and the K, the lower the better. The smoother the ionosphere will be and the more reliable it will be. And so for the best conditions, the solar flux should remain. Now, this is Ian Poole talking here. The solar flux should remain above about 150 for a few days with a K index below 2. When these conditions have been met, check out the bands and expect some good DX to be about. So keep an eye on these indices when planning your radio communications. So at this point, I'll ask if any of our audience here on Zoom would like to add anything. I know in particular that Chris VA3ECO has much better pictures of the Northern Lights based on his location in Ontario.
Yeah, I bored you guys with that last week, so I'm not going to do it again this week. One thing I'd like to point out, though, this is ionosphere propagation, which is 99% of the HF stuff, but 6 meters and 2 meters, and perhaps UHF, can also use the aurora itself. So we're working off of ions, charged particles. And we have to remember that the aurora itself are charged particles. And it may not work too well from Florida, but from the mid latitudes on up, we can actually beam north, hit those charged particles coming down into the magnetic pole and bounce back sometimes great distances. So on May 10th, I got as far as Connecticut, which is 1,200 miles. Now, granted, that was using a digital mode, but you have to almost prearrange it. But there are Slack channels and groups, Ping Jockey, for instance, Q65 Splat mode on Ping Jockey, where people will say, hey, I'm on this frequency, I'm trying to do this, and you can make connections. I did half a dozen on May 10th and 11th. It's a little bit weird. Even phone can work. Very raspy. The mode of choice is actually CW, Greg. So there you go.
Yeah.
So
what are you using for an antenna, Greg? Chris?
I was using a beam, 4-element beam on 6. People have done it on wires. Sometimes an 80-meter wire on 6 works quite well. It just depends. So
Yeah.
I have worked guys on wires. It's much more difficult, but it can be done. So there you go.
Yeah.
Back to you,
Well,
Greg.
6 meters probably is one of the more unique bands as far as propagation. And that would be a subject of a different talk. Perhaps Chris can help us out with that.
Yeah. I might even have some old pictures kicking around. Yeah, I could do that someday.
Yeah.
And you can do that without the general license too. You can do it with a technician license, if I'm not mistaken.
That's right. Well, thanks for those comments, Chris. And Chris uses aircraft, anything he can get to.
Anything I can bounce off of, yeah.
Which includes the moon. So
that's coming up big time, hopefully in the later summer. We'll see.
Okay. All right. Anything else before we close? All right. Well, I appreciate everybody's attention and comments, and we'll say 73.